Hello, my name is Rebecca Jackson, and I'm here in Fairbanks, Alaska to give my climate analysis for Unit 14. This information is based on observations made during January 30th and February 5th, 2017, and another period March 20th through March 26th, 2017. The data is provided by the National Weather Service. This screencast focuses on weather from two regions in Alaska: Anchorage, which is located near the Gulf of Alaska along the coast, and Eielson, which is located in interior Alaska. This first chart shows air temperature graphs for Anchorage and Eielson, pressure plots for Anchorage and Eielson, as well as dew point temperatures and relative humidity temperatures for the week of January 30th through February 5th, 2017. So when we look at the air temperature plots, we see that at the beginning of the week there is an increase in air temperature, which was much warmer than average, and both in Anchorage as well as in Eielson, although it was not as high of an increase in Eielson. We see that this increase came about at the same time as the dew point increased and pressure decreased. This tells us, by looking at this graph, that this was due to a change in an air mass moving over the area and not just a typical diurnal cycle. So on January 31st, we see Anchorage having a maximum temperature of 37 degrees and a minimum temperature of 27 degrees, giving us a range of 10 degrees and an average temperature of 32 degrees. The pressure measured a maximum of 1,034 millibars and a minimum of 1,025 millibars, giving us an average of 1,030 millibars per pressure. The dew point maximum was at 28 degrees and the minimum was at 25 degrees, giving us an average of 27 degrees. And usually on this day, the average maximum temperature is 24 degrees and the average minimum temperature is 12 degrees. The range is usually 12 degrees and the average temperature is 18. So we see that on this day, the temperature average was way higher than usual. In Eielson on this day, the maximum temperature was 12 degrees and the minimum temperature was 0 degrees Fahrenheit. The range was 12 degrees and the average was 6 degrees. The pressure was 1,036 millibars as a max and 1,022 millibars as a minimum, giving us an average of 1,029 millibars. The dew point measured at 9 degrees Fahrenheit as a maximum, negative 6 degrees Fahrenheit as a minimum, giving us an average of 2 degrees Fahrenheit. And typically at this day on the year, the temperature maximum is 4 degrees. The minimum is negative 7 degrees Fahrenheit, giving us a range of 11 degrees and then average of negative 4 degrees Fahrenheit. So again, in Eielson also, the temperatures were warmer than usual. On Monday, January 30th, we see on the graph previous that temperatures were beginning to increase during the midday, and the pressure began to drop and the dew point began to rise. This, I believe, is an effect of the high pressure system moving in off of Bristol Bay and the low pressure system moving in off the Gulf of Alaska. Warmer temperatures remained January 31st and February 1st before returning back towards the regular diurnal cycles that remain consistent throughout the rest of the week. Winds during this period were easterly, gaining strength in Eielson and losing strength in Anchorage during the week, but not so much. There are clouds in this weather map showing clouds, a lot of cloud coverage in both Anchorage and Eielson, which shows that there were warmer temperatures and greater water vapor in the atmosphere. On this weather map, we see both Anchorage and Eielson under the influence of high pressure systems very little cloud coverage at all, indicating that it was cooler during this period, as we still are not seeing a lot of sun effects from the sun during this period of the year. But we do see that there is heat coming from the ground because it is gray, but there's very little cloud coverage. And during this day, there was colder than usual temperatures in both regions. This summary of January 31st, 2017 shows us that during this period where an air mass passed over, we saw warmer temperatures, and which allowed us to show that there was more water vapor in the atmosphere. So that's where in the water vapor map we see a lot of blue shading, because the air was able to hold more water. The infrared map shows us that there was indeed cloud coverage in Anchorage and Eielson, and little heat was being emitted from the ground. We can't really tell because it was dark, showing little sunlight effect. On February 4th, we can see that conditions were indeed cooler. There's less water vapor in the atmosphere, as the air cannot hold that much water vapor when the temperatures are cooler. The infrared map shows no cloud coverage, very little cloud coverage in the region, and there's little solar radiation hitting Alaska. This 500 millibar upper air chart shows us that winds are decreasing in speed as they cross Alaska. This is more than likely due to the topography of Alaska. This chart shows air temperature, pressure, and dew point temperatures being plotted for Anchorage and Eielson during the week of March 20th through March 26th. In both regions, we see that temperatures are either average to below average for the majority of the week. There is greater variability in Eielson due to its location in the interior, and rather than Anchorage, which lies on the coast near the water. On Tuesday, March 21st, both Anchorage and Eielson appear to be under the influence of a high-pressure system. Anchorage is rather close to a stationary front. Warmer temperatures are coming in off the Gulf of Alaska, and the winds appear to be moving, coming from the south. Eielson seems to be having winds that are moving from the north toward the south, and they're probably cooler temperatures there. On Saturday, March 25th, this was a really cold day, much colder than average. As you can see from the map, there is very little cloud coverage, if any, in Eielson and Anchorage. Eielson this day had a maximum temperature of 18 degrees. A maximum temperature of 21 degrees and a minimum temperature of negative 26 degrees, which showed a huge range of 47 degrees and an average of negative 3 degrees Fahrenheit. And typically for this time of year, the maximum temperature is 30 degrees. The minimum temperature is 5 degrees Fahrenheit. The range is usually around 25 degrees. And the average temperature during this period of year is 18 degrees Fahrenheit. So there is a 21 degree difference in the temperature on this day in Eielson. And in Anchorage, a little colder than usual, but not so much. Again, this is because Anchorage is next to the coast, and so there's that maritime climate, which doesn't show huge variability in diurnal cycles, but there is some, but much different from Eielson, which shows huge variability in diurnal cycles. So the satellite images from March 21st show that there was little cloud coverage in Eielson and Anchorage on March 21st, and it's not very warm. There's not a lot of heat being emitted from the ground, and there's not a lot of water vapor in the atmosphere. Again, much of the same condition on March 25th, where it was even colder, little clouds, little heat being emitted from the ground, and little water vapor in the atmosphere. The upper air chart shows easterly winds crossing western Alaska, and Alaska lies between a ridge to the west and a trail to the east. There is convergence over Alaska downstream of the ridge, and this convergence aloft supports the high pressure systems that we saw, which allowed for cooler temperatures. The northern flow of winds, prevailing winds, gave March much cooler temperatures. I believe that if the direction of the wind had come from the south, then we would have seen warmer temperatures or typical temperatures in March rather than colder. Based on my analysis, it would appear that Eielson is more sensitive to possible climate change based on the observations conducted by the National Weather Service, because there's such huge variability in the climate that small changes or slight changes can have a greater impact on the region.